Okay, what's up, everyone? It's Chris from chrisbeatcancer. Today, my guest is AJ Lanigan, manufacturer, author, and all-around nice guy. That's his bio. What's up, AJ?
Thank you for being here and giving me an opportunity to chit chat with your folks. I've followed you for so long. Our mutual friend Reggie
Yep.
down in Atlanta hooked us up, and so looking forward to what we got to chit chat about today.
Yeah. I'm excited about talking about Beta Glucan, especially. Okay, so first question is pronunciation. Is it Beta Glucan or is it Beta Glucan?
Well, it is similar to many people, depending on where you're educated. It's kind of like pecans or pecans. We kind of know they're nuts,
Yep.
but there's not really an incorrect. Probably you most often hear it as glucan.
Yeah.
That soft second syllable, and but either way, people will know what you're talking about, or they won't. They'll never have heard of it. Probably 99.9% of the time.
Okay, let's start with your background.
Okay, well, age 0. Actually, my interest in biology and chemistry is probably innate. My grandfather on my father's side was a moonshiner, and my father, born in 1910, used to run that moonshine for quite a long time. Wasn't ever good enough to make it to NASCAR, but good enough not to ever been caught. And I asked my dad one time, as I saw him and some other guys, he was working then at the Southern Railroad, and they were passing around a half pint during a break of building a barn at our place. I said, Dad, how does liquor taste? And he said, son, understand this. That stuff's for selling, not for drinking. Fast forward to 1971. I'm now in pharmacy school, University of South Carolina. You have a year of pre-pharmacy, 4 years of pharmacy school. The guy that's teaching pre-pharmacy, he's actually retiring as the dean and practiced pharmacy for so many years. And he's, talking fast and talking about the pre-apothecary and how the allopath medicine and the naturopathic medicine, all this stuff. I'm taking notes. And then he says, and I catch it out of the corner of my ear, and a lot of the prescription medications that we are coming up with today are to deal with a lot of the side effects of prescription medications that we've been using over the last decade or so.
Drugs for the side effects of drugs for the side effects of drugs.
And I'm thinking, this stuff's for selling, not for drinking. Flashing back to my earlier days with my dad. So always in the back of my mind as I'm looking at, and this was one of the most robust eras in the 70s and early 80s, coming up with all these different forms of chemos, all these different forms of delivering radiation. My grandfather on my mother's side developed prostate cancer when I was about 4 or 5 years old. About the only thing they had to give him then was radiation, and they burned him up. And I can remember like it was yesterday, as my grandfather was barely able to walk out of the office, them handing my mom a couple of hypodermic needles with some morphine and Dilaudid to keep him comfortable. And I walked in early one morning, and there he was kneeling, praying as he did every morning, but he was dead. And so from a very early age, I've had a focus. I never seemed to have a lot of great luck with family members going into the hospital and coming out, whether it was some sort of an hospital-borne infection because they went in from a car wreck. My dad had a stroke, actually, while he was in the hospital for a short stay. Cancer, you run the gamut. And I'm thinking, gosh, with all these advances, now circa, early 70s now, all these modern advances that we have here. And, all my family's dropping like flies. So it goes to dawning on me there's got to be something beyond, the chemistry and the biology and all these sort of things. And so I've always had a keen interest in health but also focusing in the back of my mind all the time, what about cancer? What about cancer? There's no cure. There's no cure. What can we do? You may not have read, or maybe you did, H.G. Wells, The War of the Worlds.
I know the story.
But
Yeah,
you
saw
know
the
it
movie.
because of Tom Cruise in the latest edition that came out a few years ago. The at the end of the movie, and also at the end of the book, there's a short little statement that man has earned his right to live here on this planet. We have developed immunities that keep us safe. So we really don't have a fear of some alien life form, because those little microbes that took out, those invaders only lasted a few days. In other words, the common cold basically killed them in 72 hours from pneumonia. So that type of, I don't know if you want to call it epiphany, noetic wisdom, whatever. So wait a minute, the answer is right here inside of us. And so actually starting in the early 90s then, after floundering around for nearly 20 years, not really figuring out where I wanted to end up, I started to work more and more with medical doctors, researchers, again in institutions, places you've heard of, and teaching hospitals, really focusing on the immune system and immune response. Keeping in mind, Chris, vaccines have been given for how long? And we only discovered the B cell a couple of decades ago. And I actually worked with a group up in Clemson University, 100 miles up the road, with Tom Scott, a PhD, was on the team that discovered the B cell.
Wow.
Not that long ago. So as I said, there's so much to the science of immunology, and I am as convinced as the sun will come up in the morning that immunology and genetics are going to be the medicine of the future. Not bloodletting, which all the medical experts said 200 years ago was the thing, and if you spoke out against it, you were a heretic. I believe that not so far, not another 200 years, but sooner, we will look back on things like radiation and chemo just as a primitive tool, but that's what's currently used.
How did you discover beta glucan?
Well, the actual work, like most good discoveries, you just kind of backed over it and tripped in it. I was actually working with a medical team on what's called antigen-specific transfer factors, where we were taking taking human antigen, vaccines if you please, punching them into cows, and then extracting that first day's milk for things like respiratory syncytial virus, herpes 1, herpes 2, mononucleosis, and transferring immunity using that material. Unlike a vaccine where you actually inject the bugs, we were actually injecting the picture and say, hey, look at this immune system. If you see this, go after it. Some of the people didn't respond.
Would that be like injecting a blueprint?
Think of the transfer point molecule as a messenger molecule.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's carrying the message of whatever you shot into the cow. It could be respiratory syncytial virus. It could be herpes 1, herpes 2.
Okay.
And so the messenger says, hey, look at this. And then unlike where you put in the vaccine itself and you're putting the actual bug in there and the B cells respond, this is another type of lymphocyte that sees the picture and then...
that would tell the next host, watch out for this. Right?
Exactly.
Or this is a threat.
Okay. It's like giving a trained assassin the file folder of who he's going to be shooting. Yep. And he looks at all the pictures coming out of McDonald's, coming out of the bank, coming out of the apartment. This is your file folder. So think of as the messenger molecule that brings that picture. And the picture is different for every fingerprint. In other words, herpes 1 a transfer factor is not going to react to, say, mononucleosis. A respiratory syncytial virus is not going to react to, say, cytomegalovirus. Every picture has to have a different transfer factor. So people didn't respond. You notice some of my answers are kind of around the horn. Some people didn't respond to the transfer factor. And so the question came, well, why aren't they responding? Could it have something to do with antigen presentation? Because what happens when something comes into the body, you have those neutrophils and other, you think of it like the Pac-Man, gobbles things up, and then it shows, say, hey, look, T cell, look what we just found here. So antigen presentation, if it's absent, will not allow the transfer factor message to carry through. So we started the quest. Well, what could help antigen presentation? And the literature at that point, now we're talking early 1990s, mid 1990s, was exploding with all this research from Japan with PSK Creston. And I actually had a pharmacy buddy of mine whose family, I think it was his dad, he traveled to Japan to secure some of this PSK Creston and brought it back for his dad to use to great benefit. And so, Beta Glucan, let's start looking at that. And so we looked at mushroom, we looked at grain, we looked at seaweed, we looked at
yeast,
certain bacteria, all these different things. We spread them out on the table, and we did what we do every day. We started testing. After a while, we were able to say, okay, the group of glucans coming from the cell wall of baker's yeast was significantly superior to mushroom. Mushroom worked. The mushroom was significantly superior to certain grain glucans. Now, again, we're talking in regards to immune response.
Yeah. Now, wouldn't Bragg nutritional yeast fall in that category?
What kind of nutritional yeast?
Bragg. The brand.
Oh, I don't eat yeast, so I don't know.
Okay.
we grow our own. So
yeah.
I get it at a good price.
A lot of people are familiar with the product. You know, Paul Bragg, apple cider vinegar.
Oh, okay, I got you.
They have a nutritional yeast product.
That's what I associate it was with the vinegar. No, but they're huge companies. You've got Fleischmann's, you've got Red Star. I mean, the yeast universe in the world is literally up into billions of dollars. And for decades, yeast has been used to deliver certain microminerals like copper and zinc and selenium, because the yeast can't get up and go down to the grocery store and buy what they want to eat. They can only eat what you put in there. And so they eat these micronutrients, and then they make the food supplements out of the yeast, so you get a chelated form.
Yeah.
Now that works great unless you happen to fall in that category of people that are sensitive to yeast proteins. We solved that problem by our process of removing all the yeast proteins, removing all the lipids and fats, leaving behind just that complex carbohydrate. Carbohydrates, like nobody's allergic to that. They don't interact with anything unless you're a cow or something. You can't even break them down in the intestine. It is actually the immune cells that gobble them up, and then the internalization and the various chemicals inside the immune cells, they then secrete the water-soluble glucan molecule, which is exactly the right key to fit that glucan receptor. And so we've established what that molecule is, what it looks like. We know the molecular weight, and that's the principle behind our water-soluble injectable that's in the drug trials now.
Okay, so let's talk about what are beta glucans and what's the benefit, right? A lot of cancer patients are interested in this, and people that are just want to stay healthy as well, right? And,
absolutely.
So just talk about the function that beta glucans have in the body.
Well, if you start off with the simplest and most often talked about, it is activation of immune response. Activation, though, without overstimulation, because there are many compounds out there that will stimulate immune response. You've got things like echinacea, colostrum, astragalus, the list goes on and on. Many of those triggers, though, are based upon foreign protein. And when our immune systems see non-self, particularly non-self proteins, then that will trigger an immune response, which is usually led by an inflammatory response.
Right.
Now, short-term inflammatory response is not a bad thing. It's the long-term chronic inflammatory process that we want to avoid. So when we look at glucans in general, and then we'll narrow our focus on what we're actually involved in producing, there is now well established what we call mechanism of action, which is exactly how glucan does activate. We have a unique receptor. Think of it as a key switch to an automobile. Our molecule is the key that fits that receptor. And as I like to say, it turns the Woody Allen immune cells into Schwarzenegger cells. And cranking that immune cell up and causing it to be all that it can be, it's not going to cause the immune system to do something it's not supposed to do, but it's going to do what it's supposed to do now more, better, and faster.
Okay, so it's basically going to, and it triggers an immune response, but not a negative inflammatory immune response. So would it be safe to say that it's an immune system modulator?
That is a very common term. In fact, BRM, or biological response modifier, is a term that you often see in the medical literature. But understand, biological response modifiers can make things go up and also make things come down, which in some cases we see that certain pro-inflammatory responses are actually mediated by glucan. Now, not across the board. Somebody pop you in the eye and you get a black eye, swelling and so forth. That's part of the healing process. Beta glucan is not going to mediate that type of pain. Somebody who has rheumatoid arthritis, really bad swollen joints, it's not going to do the things that, say, prednisone or cortisone or methotrexate would do in shutting down immune response. But for example, we've looked at stress as an example. Mm-hmm. And stress produces a lot of inflammation in a chronic way. And we've done experiments with our product showing that we can actually mediate that. And we actually see reductions in corticosteroids, C-reactive proteins, and other things in the blood that show us that, yes, this is a mediating effect of certain types of inflammation. But, a lot of people say, oh, well, I can take beta glucan then across the board and it's going to mediate. No. You don't really know things, Chris. One of my favorite researchers has given me wonderful guidance over the years. You really don't know until you test it. You can Google stuff all day long, but until you actually take what you've got in your bottle and test it, you really don't know.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point because there's a lot of things out there that may or may not help someone. And what I see cancer patients doing, unfortunately, is I see them doing the, everything, including the kitchen sink approach, which I don't think is bad necessarily, but what's bad is when they are not testing, they're not following up. So they don't even know if what they're doing is working, right? They've got a massive diet change, they're taking lots of supplements, they're doing some alternative or natural non-toxic therapies, but they'll go for months and sometimes even years without getting any follow-up testing. So I think it's pretty critical that you know if what you're doing is working. If so, continue doing that thing, right? But if not, it's time to change gears.
Well, it is, and how often have we heard throughout the years, some guy that was a world record runner, as fit as a fiddle, got up in the morning, did his stretching, and had a heart attack. on his last turn. You know, some young athlete in high school or on college drops dead on the court, eating all the good foods, drinking all the good water, getting all the great exercise, listening to soothing music at night, but here he is or she is assuming room temperature. So we can't necessarily go by the way we feel. And we also can't disregard placebo effect. Placebo is very well established in that if you believe hard enough, that is enough in many cases to demonstrate improvement in certain conditions. And it is well documented. It's also what they call a nocebo effect.
Yep.
You get 1,000 people in an audience, let's say, that are cancer patients, stage 4 and critical, and I've got nothing but sugar pills in my bottle. And I give a tremendous presentation about how this new experimental drug is going to give somebody about a 12% increase in longevity. But there are side effects. Hair will fall out, nausea, dizziness, diarrhea. Give them a list of the standard things. A third of those people will have some of those side effects. Some won't, and some it won't. You know, so these types of things are real based on this right here. I tell cancer patients in particular, cover all your bases. You get your mind right, you get your family, your friends, your support people right. You say your prayers. In other words, you get all the team together.
Yep.
Okay, because we don't get a lot of practice, for the fight when it comes to cancer. Teenage acne, whole different thing.
So let's talk about the food sources of beta glucans. So I understand that oats are a food source, and what else?
Barley.
I'm trying to sound smart. You already said barley, so don't give that one away.
What kind of soups do you like? What do you slice up and put in the soups?
Yeah, so
from Japan.
There's miso.
That would have some mushrooms.
Yeah, that was the big one.
Huge in the Far East and Southeast Asia. And really, if you look at the globe, you look at the sources. I'm not talking about the companies, but if you look at mushrooms, you look at cereal grains, you look at baker's yeast. Depending on where you lived, this is where the research evolved from on the various glucans. See, we had a drug approved, I say we collectively, had a drug approved from a mushroom source glucan 25, 30 years ago called PSK Crestin.
Mm-hmm.
And the Japanese do things a little bit differently than we do here in the U.S. as far as the FDA. Their position 25, 30 years ago is, look, everybody's drinking mushroom soup for like 1,000 plus years. We don't think we're going to hurt anybody. So let's skip the safety studies. And they went directly into hospitals, hundreds of hospitals, and thousands of patients, and started giving them this mushroom extract, PSK Crestin. Well, they already had all the experience with chemo and radiation and surgery. So we're just going to change one variable. And the outcomes were tremendous, increases in quality of life. And if you go to PubMed, PubMed, and type in PSK Crestin, Krestin, you will see hundreds of studies. And a lot of times on PubMed, you can't get the whole study, but you can see the
summary,
the conclusion. The first 200 words, let's say. But you look at colorectal cancer, breast cancer, bladder cancer, every cancer you can imagine showed safety and benefit. So it ended up being approved as a drug. Now that drug is $10 a gram, and it takes around 3 to 6 grams daily to meet the prescription to have an effect. Somewhere around $900 to $1,800 monthly for Japanese. I've been to Japan a few times. I look like Godzilla over there. I mean, they are a small people. You would be the center on every single basketball team, I think, in Japan.
I'm 6'2", so yeah.
But they don't weigh much.
Yeah.
If you see a fat Japanese, He's visiting from America.
Okay. Okay, so obviously this drug is not available to people in the U.S., right? And is it?
Yeah, well, it's a prescription drug, and so if you had the money and the means, but here's an interesting point. Back in 2006, we were already testing other compounds, PSK Creston being one of them, and a lot of other glucans, a lot of other non-glucan immune modulators. And PSK Creston, by the way, is the second best immune modulator in the world. It takes 8 times the dose of our material to get the same immune response. It would not be, in my mind, prudent to go buy the second best product for 18 times the price. That's just me, though.
How much of a dose are we talking about?
Well, for a person who is healthy, the formula is relatively simple and straightforward, around 2 milligrams per kilogram of body weight. Now, you're not from South Florida, are you?
I am not.
So we have to explain what a kilo is. A kilo is like
That's right.
It's like 2.2 pounds, a half a bag of sugar.
Right.
So 100 milligrams if you weigh 110 pounds if you're healthy. 200 milligrams if you weigh 220 pounds. Again, assuming good health.
Right.
Let's say you're not in good health. Cancer, infections, allergies, exposure to heavy metals, some type of environmental toxins, aging. All of these things fall under the umbrella of the immune system. So if you're not healthy, you need 20 milligrams per kilo of body weight. So now you take 500 milligrams per 55 pounds of body weight. 110 pounds, you take 1,000 milligrams. Big fat boy like me, I'm a pretty good customer because I'm probably going to be taking 3 or 4 capsules daily to get my immune system up here. Now, here's the beautiful thing about it, Chris.
Well, I take like 2 a day from Better Way Health. I don't even know what the milligram is on that. What's that?
My guess is it a blue bottle?
Yeah.
Okay, that's the 500 milligram. See, much of what we do is based out of here in South Carolina, so we have to color code things. Blue is the 500.
Okay, yeah.
And gold is the 100. That way, when somebody calls from, out in the country, so to speak, or we got a lot of country here in South Carolina, we don't bother them with actually reading the label. We just say, what color is it? And that helps us identify.
So it's 500 milligrams for 2 or each?
Well, it's a 500 milligram for every 55 pounds of body weight. So your body weight is what, about 175?
Yeah, 160 something.
160, give or take. So 2 would be a good dose for you, assuming that you're in relatively good health. Now, let's say you got the monkey on your back.
Yep.
And let's don't worry about the flavor of the ice cream here. Let's understand that the immune system just likes ice cream.
Yep.
And so if you give the immune system the activation, it's going to eat the ice cream. So whether the ice cream is breast cancer, whether the ice cream is meningitis, I just read a piece today where a young college student dies again of meningitis. They didn't feel real good yesterday. They went to bed, didn't wake up this morning. These are young people. These are people that shouldn't be breaking down and dying. Why? The immune system failed them. Same thing with cancer. A person who's been diagnosed with cancer, their immune system has failed to do its job, to identify that cancer cell, to attack it, destroy and eliminate it. That's the job of the immune army.
Yep.
So it doesn't really make any difference if we're talking about a bug or a cancer cell or some sort of heavy metal or whatever. It's not the beta glucan versus the challenge. It is the beta glucan causing that immune system, again, to do what it's supposed to be doing. More, better, and faster.
Yeah. So for somebody like me, if, like you said, if I had the monkey on my back, if I was, full of cancer or whatever, the dose for me
Probably three 500s.
Instead of 2.
instead of 2.
Yeah, okay.
So let's assume the 24 karat gold 5-star athlete eats all the right foods, takes huge amounts of food supplements, exercises. Their mind is right. I mean, their chi is in, all is right. They are going to see the immune response at around 30% in the face of a challenge. Now that shocks a lot of people. They say, what do you mean 30%? My immune system works at 100%. No, your immune system never would work at 100% in the face of a challenge. That's the key. If something comes to get you, what can you expect the immune system to do for you? And the perfectly healthy person is going to get an immune response of around 30 to 31% out of the total 100%. So that's our baseline that we look at. When you take the product at, let's say, 2 milligrams per kilo body weight, the low dose, that 30 is going to go up to around 45, maybe a little more. You see it? If we raise that dose to 10 times that, it's going to go well past that up to somewhere around 60 to 70%. In other words, we're going to cause your immune response, wherever it is, to more than double. So you, as the user of the product, get to decide where you want to dial your immune system in when you get up in the morning. You look at that bottle and you say, gosh, I know I'm 24 karat, but I've got to go to the dentist and get my wisdom teeth pulled next Monday. Well, you'd want to be bumping up your dose probably 3 or 4 days before, day of, and 3 or 4 days after.
Like, for traveling, getting on a plane.
Getting on a plane. Every time you breathe in, you're breathing in what those other 200 people just breathed out. Never mind the cosmic radiation, never mind, living on this planet is kind of tough. and the immune system is the only thing that stands between you and everything in you, on you, and around you.
Yeah, that's what keeps you well.
Healthy bone and tissue cannot protect itself. A lot of people think, oh, well, I eat well. I got $400 worth of vitamins that I take. I can't pick my parents, so my immune system is what I got. Not true. That would have been true 40 or 50 years ago when immunology was just being born. But now we have the technology to actually be able to measure these immunological functions and determine whether or not something does or does not increase immune function. Again, I keep using the term immune function. You go to the doctor, and he does all of this blood work, and he looks at the numbers of white blood cells, and he looks at natural killer cells, and he looks at monocytes and all that stuff. Well, all those numbers look healthy, but a healthy immune system does not necessarily correspond with a healthy immune response. And that's what beta glucan is all about, is to get the best response you can out of your immune system, but completely safe.
Yeah. And that's obviously very important. Thinking about the law of diminishing returns, right? There is a point where you would take more than you would get a benefit from.
Oh, absolutely.
But you mentioned taking 10 times as much. And so do some people take that much?
We have done repeated dose curves for, over a dozen years.
Yeah.
And so we know within a fraction of a point, give or take, where you're going to be at your body weight.
Yep.
Based on a particular dose. We know that at a certain dose, we can put you from, say, 30% up to 40%. Increase the dose, we put you at 50%. Increase the dose again, 60%. But once you get up to around that 65 to 70%, you could eat a 55-gallon drum of this material. You're not going to get any additional juice for the squeeze.
Yeah. So what are the blood markers that you look at to determine the effectiveness of beta glucan?
There's actually a pretty long list. Probably the golden test, the one that you start off with, is we look at the cells that are the most abundant of your immune army. Those are called neutrophils. When you do your blood work at the doctor's office, when you see the neutrophil count, the NEU, they're going to range anywhere from 50 to 70% of all your white blood cells. So you want to see some immune response? Let's see what they do with that cell group. So that's the first thing we do. We look at immune cell function of neutrophils. Again, we establish the baseline using something like salt water, which is not going to, have an effect. And then we start dosing the product. Now, you start off with, and let's say it's product X. We don't know what it is, or product X, Y, and Z. You look at the label, and you maybe think the manufacturer actually knows what he's talking about. And so you calculate the dose based on the label, and you measure and see what the immune response. Chris, we have tested upwards of several hundred products over the years. The ones that are most advertised, the most widely available, not just here in the U.S., but in Europe, Eastern Europe, Asia, Southeast Asia, Australia. I think we've measured on everything but the Arctic and the Antarctic. We have seen products where at 500 times their recommended dose, there's no benefit beyond that of salt water.
Wow.
But
Total
don't
waste,
let that
right?
stand in the way of millions of dollars of sales. So, excuse me, been talking a lot today. So it's important that a consumer look at a bottle, and you got to ask yourself, does the manufacturer of this product or the distributor, doesn't make any difference, have disinterested third-party research that shows what's actually in that bottle has been tested and shown to be safe and beneficial? Without that, I think you're pushing a rope up a hill.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So back to the blood work thing. What the neutrophil count changes?
That's the first thing, not the count, but the function.
Okay.
In other words, if 30% of the cells are responding to a challenge under salt water, you add products X, Y, and Z, does it move? Does it move 5%, 8%, 10%? And you measure that. Then you double the dose. You check it again. Does the dose curve go up, or is that it? You double the dose again. You double the dose again. You double the dose again. At some point, the dose curve will flatten out for everybody. Unfortunately, a lot of them flatten out at salt water, regardless of maybe, again, 500 times the dose. Our material works actually at very, very low doses. You could take probably 1/8, 1/16 of our recommended dose of our 2 milligram. In other words, you could be down to a quarter of a milligram per keg, and you're gonna see immune response. But I'm like this, recognizing that I live here on Earth, and when I get up in the morning, everything that's going to be after me, I don't want a 2 or 3% increase over normal. I want 10 or 15 or 20. Our recommended dose gives you about a 50% increase over your normal level. If I got the monkey on my back, I want to throw the kitchen sink. Hence, I want to take a higher dose. But we know what our dose is going to be. Now, another test, natural killer cells, NK cells. Those are very, very low percentage numbers of cells, but they're very key in looking at and surveilling human cells that might be virally infected or cancer cells. So we won't, I talk about them being the Green Berets. You just give them a knife and drop them behind the enemy lines, and they're just going to slash throats coming out. That's what the natural killers do. They blow up human cells that maybe have herpes in them. They blow up human cells that maybe don't have a smiley face. They may not be cancer, but there's just something iffy about that cell. That's the kind of natural killer cell function that you want. So the way that test works is you have your cells, again, establishing a baseline. You put in target cells, maybe sheep erythrocytes, or something that's non-self, and you see how many it kills in a set minute, number of minutes. Then you put in your product X, Y, and Z, and see how much killing increases with that dose. So that's another common cell test. Another one would be testing the way that cells internalize and then kill. The killing inside cells, like phagocytes, your neutrophils, your monocytes, your macrophages, have to do with the release many times of free radicals. Things like peroxide, superoxide, nitric oxide. So we can actually measure the release of these free radicals against, again, a baseline. You establish a baseline and you see how much of these killing chemicals will be released. Another type of test would be to look at what we call naive T cells. Cells that are just kind of sitting around, and we call them naive. Then we can measure activated cells. In other words, from naive to positive. So CD4 positive, CD8 positive. That tells us that the immune system has seen something that it doesn't need to be standing around on the street corner. It actually needs to get involved in a process. Or another one that is real important, how does the immune system up in your chest know that you just got a splinter in your toe this morning? And it's going to run all those white blood cells down there to create all that pus and attack that non-self entity. They didn't see the splinter. They don't have cell phones. What's the deal? Well, the relief, we hope. So it is the release of what we call cytokines. Think of cytokines as like chemical fax messages, chemical emails.
Yep.
And so those immune cells that are on patrol down there say, whoa, what's that big thing that just stuck in the end of AJ's toe? And so they release chemicals upstream that these other cells pick up. And now you got the charge of the light brigade, we call chemotaxis, where they're rushing to see what the alarm's all about. So we can measure like interleukin 2, we can measure gamma interferon, all these other things that help to activate, regulate, and otherwise cause the immune response to be better. And so all this array, and you're looking at, we're not talking about your $200 blood tests here. We're talking about arguably tens of thousands of dollars to run these arrays of tests. And it's not the type of test that we would expect the average patient to do. But here's where we are on this. I don't expect people to accept my word on what these products may or may not do. That's why I tell people to go to PubMed and look up not just Glucans. If you just looked up Glucans, you're going to come up with like 140 plus thousand studies. If you look at Glucan in cancer, for example, you're going to come up with over 8,000 studies. All those aren't on my product. But everything within the last decade or so that has advanced the science has been on the product that is in the bottle that has my name on it. So this is key, I think, for a person who maybe has been tricked, maybe somebody being a little more economical with the truth than maybe they should have, has gotten them to buy a product that may not be what they believe it is. And they don't have $10,000, $20,000, $30,000 to test. Well, would you go out and have to perform tests to determine that Tyrannosaurus Rex was a meat eater? Or is that pretty much a known?
I think it's pretty much known, although no one's ever seen one.
That's why we have people.
Well, I've seen Jurassic Park.
Yeah, we don't ask people to look to us for the truth. Harvard, Tulane, University of Louisville, McGill, Brown University, again, teaching hospitals in Europe, the Far East. Everybody that is in the field of immunology today knows about this product. and countless numbers of those institutions have the same stuff that's in your bottle, and they're going to get up in the morning and they're going to continue the research. We just had another piece published earlier this week on melanoma. We had several already published this year on things like hematopoiesis, which has to do with when chemo and radiation drives the blood counts down. Natural killer cell function. I mean, all the gamut. These things are constantly being reviewed and tested. And that's what we ask people, unless they're researchers. Now, I got to say, a lot of people that claim they're researchers, that just means they know how to find Wikipedia and Google something. But I'm talking about the people that are actually wearing the white coats, killing the rats, drawing blood and treating human beings. A lot of these same studies I'm talking about, double-blinded placebo crossover, not just on cancer. We've got 5 different double-blinded placebo studies on children and upper respiratory tract infections, things like ear infections, sore throats, runny noses, the kind of thing. I mean, look around at all these kids who evidently the parent or the caregiver thinks they were born with an antibody deficiency. And so they're picking up the phone saying, hey, doc, can you call me in a prescription for antibody? Well, that's going to be messing up the gut. The gut's not going to be able to do its job. So all that good nourishment that you're feeding that kid, gut can't handle it. And then you wonder why the kid is sucking on a steroid stick when they're in college and in the waiting room waiting on chemo and radiation 30 years later or sooner. So wake up and do something for the kids, get ahead of the curve, and support the immune system. You want to whine and carry on about them brushing and flossing? Hey, Chris, the worst thing that can happen is their teeth fall out. They can still gum hamburger and sip a soup. Okay? If your immune system clicks off, the meat's going to start leaving the bones in about 72 hours. That is a serious, serious problem.
It is a problem, and cancer patients obviously have a significant immune function problem. And you said this earlier, but it's something I say as well. I mean, the difference between someone with tumors and no tumors is their immune system. That's the difference.
Well, tumors, hard tumors. What about leukemia? Your soft tumors, hard tumors. Again, let's don't get hung up on the flavor of the ice cream. Whether it's a scoop or if it's in a boat or a bucket or wherever, if we get that immune system working the way it's supposed to be, it's going to go eat the ice cream. If we don't, well, we're just going to become our own form of banana split. And I get calls every day. I'm sure you get a lot of calls every day from
Absolutely.
People who have the challenges. And one of the first things that I remark, if I remember it, is, boy, I wish I'd have met you a lot sooner. Because, and am I sitting here making the claim that we're curing or preventing cancer? No, I have no such skills. I have no such knowledge. I have no such ability. But here's what I do know. I know that if you, me, or anybody else has a chance of surviving here on this planet, with all that's trying to get us, cancer notwithstanding, it is going to be based upon the ability of our immune systems to meet and overcome the challenges, or those challenges overcome our immune system. Now, I'm not talking about a drive-by shooting. I'm talking about a vast majority of the people that are stacked up in hospitals like Cordwood, the medically maimed, that are suffering from, again, it could start off with a young kid with an ear infection and a runny nose. And there's no bad day to start supporting the immune system. And I don't know if you noticed that I use a lot of analogies. If I were to flip the light switch on in a room, let's equate that for you using our product and flipping on the immune system. Once you flip the light switch on, what benefit is there to try to take a second, third, or fourth, or fifth product to activate the lights? The lights are all on, okay? Go clean out the dishwasher, go fold the clothes, go cut the grass. In other words, do other things to benefit your well-being. Again, deal with proper diet, proper exercise, a checkup from the neck up, all of those things that are going to further improve your health. You have taken care of the immune response. And we know this, again, because we've tested it. And people certainly do better if they don't eat a lot of sugar. They do better if they don't eat a lot of fried foods. They do better if they don't, eat a lot of heavy metals and insecticides and pesticides. But what you're doing there is you're tearing down the body's terrain, actually giving the immune system more work instead of sitting there and having the ability to do its job, which is to defend you against other stuff. It's having to fight you and your goofiness, backing up the dump truck with all the stuff. Now the immune system's in there shoveling all the crap you just put in there. Are we allowed to say crap?
I think we can get away with that, yeah.
And throwing that out of the foxhole when it ought to be sitting there with the weapons trained, so when the virus comes up, bam. When the bacteria shows up, bam. There's a cancer cell, bam. That's what your immune system needs to be doing. So think in terms: do you want your immune system to be garbage collectors, to be repair mechanics, which they're going to do if need be, or do you want your immune system serving you to protect you? That's, people need to think that before they sit down at a meal or involve themselves in some activity or get up angry or stay depressed. Man, get over it. Get over it. Get over all these things. We can't do a whole lot about the air on the planet, but boy, there's a lot of things we do have control over. And
That's
those two are going to benefit you, not to put so much burden on the immune system.
That's right. I mean, the immune system's like the National Guard, right? And if your body's overloaded with toxins and heavy metals and bacteria and parasites, then you only have a limited amount of resources to deal with all that stuff and cancer cells, right? And I see this all the time, but most cancer patients, again, their bodies are just overloaded with toxins and stress, and a lot of times they're nutrient deficient in several areas. And yeah, I mean, their immune system is crippled, not to mention that stress cripples your immune function as well. So this is a typical cancer patient avatar what I'm talking about right now, right? And yeah, I mean, it's a great point you brought up, and I'm glad you did, because it's a really good goal. And obviously, taking beta glucans is not like you wouldn't tell someone, hey, just keep eating McDonald's, Burger King, and Pizza Hut, and drinking Cokes all day, and just take beta glucans, and you'll be fine, right? It needs to be the part of a total life change, or total revamping your diet, overhauling your life, forgiving everyone that's hurt you, right? You got to do all those things. And I know the encouraging thing is, and of course you want to support your body's ability to repair, regenerate, detoxify, and identify and eliminate cancer cells. That's where the immune system comes in the most. And I personally know many cancer patients that took beta glucans as part of their protocol. I took them back in 2004, and I've taken them on and off for years. I'm currently taking them. Took them today, so I'm back on a beta glucans kick. So anyway, are there any closing words you have for people that are listening right now that have cancer, right? And they're looking for information, and I'm imagining this is probably the same things that you are saying to people every day anyway. So what are those things?
I think from my perspective, and as much as I've seen in the 20 years, people just like yourself who have a personal story to tell, I never get tired of hearing those stories. But I think if I'm in your position, knowing nothing about this, it's really being sure that you understand, number one, that nutrition The helping building of healthy bone and tissue and the maintenance thereof is one thing. Getting yourself better immune response than all of that can do together is entirely a different thing. As if you were to choose an automobile and you would have to pick between, well, do I want a brake or do I want a gas pedal? Well, for that automobile to be at optimum, you need both. You need both good nutrition, the good air, the good water, the rest, dealing with stress. But we also now have a tool that years ago we did not have. When I first started with this work, Chris, in 1996, a single 100 milligram capsule was $198 plus shipping and handling.
Expensive. Yeah.
And it's not that I'm particularly smart. I was able to come up with a process that helped to be able to manufacture this product so that you could buy a bottle of 60 of them for $29.95 plus shipping and handling. You could get 5 times that much for around $70. So that's why they let me put my name on a lot of bottles, not because I discovered it, not because I've done the work. I've worked alongside. I actually got my own little coat when I go and they don't let me dress like this in the lab, but even though they'd like to. But the upshot is recognize that there is a tool now that is safe and is beneficial. And there's no magic to the dosing. All we got to do is know your body weight, and you will benefit from it. In fact, one researcher says it works, and it works every time, referring to the fact that if you're taking the product based upon the instructions, you will get the immune response. After that, it's between your immune system and the ice cream. Say your prayers, cover all the bases.
AJ, thank you so much for doing this. Where can people find you?
Well, the best thing to do, I'm happy for people to find me, but I've actually created a website for folks just like you and the folks that follow your work, and that is called Vita with Immunity. That's V as in Victor, ITA with, WITH, immunity.com. Vita is Latin for life. So to help you remember it, life with immunity. Mm-hmm. Use that as your basic tool to learn about it's not a commercial site. You're not going to get spammed or anything. And then from there, I'm happy for people to, go to Facebook. In the Facebook, I'm actually wearing a tie. It's an old picture though. So, happy for people to reach out on Facebook or just, people call me. I'm reluctant to give out my telephone number because you may have.
That's okay. No,
don't give it out here. You may have some attractive women that watch your videos, and I've got a girlfriend, so I don't want to run the risk there.
That's great, and I'll put a link to Better Way Health.
That's perfect.
The folks that work with you and have the Beta Glucan supplement that I take. So
they have a great team, and I can't say enough good things. Any customer that calls to Better Way Health, I got to tell you, you can spend more time, you can spend more money, but you cannot get better service than you're going to get from those guys down there. They are truly 24 karat.
Yeah, shout out to Reggie Black and Enoch over there. They're really good
Whole
guys.
team is
Those are the two guys I know anyway.
Yeah.
Okay, AJ, great, man. Thanks so much. And listen, thanks for watching, everybody. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up, like it, share it, and let's spread the message about beta glucans. It's a powerful substance from nature that can help you. So why not take it?
Thank you, my friend.
Thanks, AJ.